In medieval society, marriage was not just a personal milestone, but a critical mechanism for securing political alliances and transferring wealth. Marriages were arranged as strategic business deals rather than romantic unions. For the nobility, marriage was less about love and more about leverage. Families used their children, particularly daughters, as pawns in a game of power and property. By marrying into another influential family, they could secure alliances, gain military support, or acquire land and wealth. This practice was deeply entwined with the feudal system, where land ownership and political power were closely linked. Political dynamics heavily influenced marriage arrangements. A union could bring peace between warring factions or strengthen a family's claim to a throne. Economic motivations were equally significant. Marrying off a daughter could mean a hefty dowry, a crucial asset in an era where wealth was tied to land. In this context, children were viewed as economic assets. This commodification of children, particularly daughters, was a societal norm ingrained in the fabric of medieval life. Child marriages were prevalent among the nobility, with young girls often betrothed before reaching puberty. The case of Margaret Beaufort is a poignant example. At 6, her guardians married her to John de la Pole, essentially treating her as a bargaining chip in a real estate transaction. Margaret was too young to comprehend her fate, yet the adults around her were fully aware of the stakes involved. Her marriage was annulled 3 years later due to shifting political landscapes, and she was subsequently married to Edmund Tudor at age 12. Similarly, Isabella of Valois, daughter of the King of France, was married to King Richard Tupiu of England at the tender age of 6. Her trousseau included dolls and miniature furniture, highlighting her tender age. The marriage contract stipulated that consummation would not occur until she turned 12, acknowledging the extremity even by medieval standards. These marriages illustrate the legal framework and societal acceptance of child marriages. Guardians played a pivotal role in negotiating these unions, prioritizing political and economic gains over the welfare of the child. While noble children faced these grim realities, commoners often married later, typically in their late teens or early 20s. This contrast underscores the distinct pressures faced by the nobility, driven by the need to secure alliances and preserve wealth. The wedding night in medieval times was marked by intrusive customs that would be considered humiliating today. The public bedding ceremony was a tradition that involved friends and family escorting the newlyweds to their chamber. The women would prepare the bride, while the men would do the same for the groom. This ritual was not just about ensuring the couple consummated the marriage, but also about publicly validating the union. The bedding ceremony was more than a mere spectacle. It held cultural and legal significance. Consummation was the act that made the marriage official and binding. Without it, the marriage could be annulled, leading to the collapse of political alliances. This was particularly crucial in high-profile marriages where the stakes were immense. The case of Margaret of York's marriage to Charles the Bold in 1469 exemplifies this. The elaborate bedding ceremony was a high-pressure event, with numerous noble guests witnessing and chronicling the proceedings. The medieval period was marked by a stark lack of agency for women in their own marital arrangements. Once married, a woman's legal status was subsumed under her husband's. She had little to no autonomy, and her rights were severely restricted. The church played a significant role in shaping marital law, often reinforcing societal norms that dictated a woman's role as a wife. Women's rights within marriage were limited, with legal constraints ensuring their subservience. The church's influence permeated all aspects of marital life, from the sanctity of the union to the expectations of wifely obedience. Despite the oppressive nature of these norms, there were instances of women exercising agency within their constrained roles, often through managing household affairs or influencing their husband's decisions. The failure to consummate a marriage had serious legal and political repercussions. An unconsummated marriage could be annulled, nullifying any alliances or wealth transfers that the union was meant to secure. Witnesses played a critical role in ensuring consummation, sometimes staying near the bedchamber to confirm the act had occurred. The church was heavily involved in annulling marriages, often using non-consummation as a basis for dissolution. This was not merely a religious concern but a political one, as unconsummated marriages could unravel carefully constructed alliances. The stakes were high, with political stability and family fortunes hanging in the balance. Marriage in the medieval era was fraught with dangers, particularly for women. High maternal mortality rates were a grim reality, with childbirth often proving fatal for young brides. Additionally, domestic violence was a prevalent issue, with few legal protections for women against spousal abuse. The health risks associated with young brides were exacerbated by the lack of medical knowledge and resources. Societal acceptance of marital violence further compounded the dangers women faced. Domestic abuse was often overlooked, with legal systems offering little recourse for victims. This lack of protection reflected broader societal attitudes that viewed women as subordinate to their husbands. The transition from medieval to early modern marriage practices marked a gradual shift towards more humane treatment and increased autonomy for individuals within marriages. The Renaissance period brought about changes in attitudes towards marriage, influenced by emerging legal reforms and a growing emphasis on individual rights. The early modern period saw a slow but steady evolution in women's rights, with increasing recognition of their need for education and autonomy. While these changes were incremental, they laid the groundwork for future advancements in gender equality. The legacy of medieval marriage practices continues to influence modern perceptions of marriage and relationships. Stereotypes and myths originating from this period persist in contemporary culture, often romanticizing or vilifying medieval marriage traditions. Medieval marriage has been portrayed in literature and media, shaping societal views on gender roles and marital expectations. These portrayals often emphasize the extremes of medieval practices, highlighting the stark contrast with modern marriage ideals. Despite the passage of time, the cultural impact of medieval marriage remains evident, providing a lens through which we can examine and understand our current perspectives on marriage. In conclusion, medieval marriage was a complex institution, deeply entwined with the social, political, and economic fabric of the time. While these practices have evolved, their legacy continues to shape our understanding of marriage and relationships today. As we transition to the next chapter, we will explore how these historical realities inform contemporary views on love, partnership, and personal autonomy. In the annals of history, the medieval bedding ceremony is often romanticized as a quaint tradition, yet its reality was far more complex and at times invasive. These ceremonies were deeply rooted in the social and political fabric of the time, serving as a public declaration of the consummation of marriage. While popular culture may suggest that these events were universal, they were predominantly an upper-class tradition, reserved for those with political alliances at stake. For the common folk, marriage was a simpler, more private affair. The custom of bedding ceremonies varied significantly by region. In some areas, the ceremony was symbolic, with guests escorting the newlyweds to their chamber and offering blessings before leaving them in privacy. However, in certain Scandinavian countries, public bedding was not just a custom, but a legal requirement to validate the marriage. This practice, though intended to ensure the legitimacy of heirs, often felt like an invasion of privacy. Even royalty grew wary of this tradition. King Charles I of England famously barred the door to his bedroom, refusing to participate in the customary public display. Yet, despite these protests, the tradition lingered for centuries among different social classes. For child brides like Isabella of Valois, the bedding ceremony was a stark reminder that their childhood was over. At the tender age of 6, Isabella was thrust into a world where she was no longer a child, but a possession. The ceremony, with its public nature, was about control and ownership, turning what should have been a private moment into a spectacle for validation. The plight of child brides in medieval times is a testament to the harsh realities faced by young girls thrust into adulthood before their time. These marriages were often arranged for political or economic reasons, with little regard for the emotional or physical well-being of the bride. Isabella of Valois serves as a poignant example. Married at a young age, she was forced to leave behind her childhood toys and innocence. The psychological impact on such young brides was profound, as they were expected to fulfill adult roles and responsibilities without the maturity or experience needed to navigate such demands. Societal views on childhood and marriage were vastly different from today. Children were seen as miniature adults, and their primary value was in forging alliances or producing heirs. This loss of childhood was not just a personal tragedy, but a societal norm, perpetuated by the very structures that governed medieval life. The stories of individual child brides, often documented in letters or chronicles, reveal the personal toll of these marriages. Many girls faced isolation, fear, and a loss of autonomy, with their lives dictated by the needs and desires of their husbands and families. The dangers of childbirth in medieval times cannot be overstated. For many women, pregnancy was a gamble with their lives, with mortality rates for mothers and infants alarmingly high. Margaret Beaufort's story is illustrative of the perilous nature of medieval childbirth. Married at 12 and pregnant shortly thereafter, Margaret's body was ill, prepared for the rigors of childbirth. Her labor was so traumatic that, despite subsequent marriages, she never bore another child. This was not an isolated incident. 1 in 3 women died during childbirth or from complications shortly thereafter. This statistic is staggering, reflecting the lack of medical knowledge and the dangerous practices employed during labor. Bloodletting, for example, was a common practice, despite its detrimental effects on women already weakened by labor. Even those with access to the best medical care of the time, like Isabella of Aragon, were not spared. She endured days of agonizing labor before succumbing at 18. The pressure on noblewomen to produce heirs only compounded the dangers they faced. Repeated pregnancies were expected, often leading to physical debilitation and chronic health issues. The societal expectation was relentless: produce heirs or face the consequences. For noblewomen, their primary role was to bear children, specifically male heirs, to secure the family line. This expectation was not only a personal burden but a societal mandate. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of her time, survived 10 pregnancies, each one a potential death sentence. Most noblewomen were expected to endure 8 to 15 pregnancies, with little regard for their health or well-being. The physical toll of repeated pregnancies was immense. Women faced a host of health issues, from prolapsed organs to chronic pain, as their bodies bore the brunt of continuous childbearing. Despite modern understanding of fertility issues, medieval medicine placed the blame squarely on women, ignoring the role of male fertility in conception difficulties. For those who survived the rigors of childbirth, life was often marked by physical pain and societal pressure to continue bearing children until menopause or death. The expectation was clear: a woman's worth was tied to her ability to produce heirs, regardless of the cost to her health or life. The legal framework of medieval marriage was heavily skewed against women, offering them little in the way of rights or protections. Under the doctrine of reasonable chastisement, husbands had the legal right to physically discipline their wives for perceived misbehavior. This power dynamic was not only accepted but legally sanctioned, leaving women vulnerable to abuse and violence. The concept of reasonable chastisement was loosely defined, allowing for significant abuse. Cases exist of husbands legally cleared for beating their wives, provided the implement used was no thicker than their thumb. Such laws reflect a societal view that women were property, to be controlled and disciplined by their husbands. This legal landscape created a climate of fear and subjugation for women who had little recourse against abusive spouses. The stories of women who suffered under these laws are harrowing, revealing a world where domestic violence was not only tolerated but institutionalized. Henry VIII's use of medieval marriage laws represents the extreme lengths to which these laws could be manipulated. Desperate for a male heir, Henry's actions were a stark reflection of the societal pressure to produce a successor. When his wives failed to deliver a male heir, Henry resorted to annulments and executions, exploiting the legal system to suit his needs. His marriages, marked by political and personal drama, underscore the broader societal attitudes towards marriage and succession. Henry's actions had far-reaching implications, setting a precedent for the use of marriage laws as a tool for personal and political gain. The fallout from his actions was profound, reshaping the course of English history and influencing the evolution of marriage laws in the centuries that followed. The psychological impact of medieval marriage practices on women was significant, affecting their mental health and sense of self. The loss of autonomy, coupled with the constant threat of violence or death, shaped women's lives in profound ways. For many women, marriage was not a partnership but a form of servitude, where their needs and desires were secondary to those of their husbands and families. The mental health issues faced by medieval women were often overlooked, with little understanding or support available. Coping mechanisms varied, with some women finding solace in religion or personal relationships, while others resisted quietly against the constraints imposed upon them. The narratives of women from this era provide insight into their struggles and resilience, revealing the complexity of their lives and the strength required to navigate a world that often viewed them as little more than property. Marriage practices in medieval times were heavily influenced by social class, with significant differences between the experiences of royalty, nobility, and common folk. For the upper classes, marriage was often a strategic alliance, with little regard for personal feelings or compatibility. In contrast, common folk had more freedom in choosing their partners, though economic and social considerations still played a role. The intersection of class and gender created a complex dynamic where women's experiences were shaped by both their social standing and their gender. Marriage was not just a personal relationship, but a tool for social mobility and economic gain, reflecting the deeply entrenched hierarchies of medieval society. As we conclude this chapter, it is clear that medieval marriage was a multifaceted institution, deeply intertwined with the social, political, and economic structures of the time. The practices and attitudes of this era continue to echo in our contemporary understanding of marriage and gender roles, offering a sobering reminder of the progress still to be made. In the next chapter, we will explore how these historical realities inform modern perspectives on love, partnership, and personal autonomy, bridging the gap between past and present. In the tapestry of medieval society, marriage laws were woven as instruments of power and control, predominantly benefiting men and the crown while often sacrificing the well-being of women. The case of Anne Boleyn serves as a poignant illustration of how these laws were manipulated to dispose of women deemed inconvenient. Anne, the second wife of Henry VI, failed to produce a male heir, a failure that sealed her fate in a society where the birth of a son was tantamount to securing the future of a dynasty. Her subsequent trial on charges of adultery, incest, and treason was a grim spectacle of legal maneuvering. The evidence against her was flimsy, yet medieval law dictated that a wife's adultery constituted treason against the crown, as it threatened the legitimacy of the royal succession. The penalty, as Anne tragically discovered, was death. The influence of the Catholic Church on these laws was profound. Marriage was considered a sacred union, indissoluble except under the rarest of circumstances. The Church's grip on the institution meant that women like Anne and Catherine Howard, another of Henry's wives who met a similar fate, were left with little recourse. The societal implications of these laws were profound, casting women into roles of subservience and vulnerability, their very lives subject to the whims of their husbands and the crown. Royal marriages in medieval times were primarily transactions of power, alliances forged not out of love, but necessity. They were strategic moves on the chessboard of European politics, designed to consolidate power, secure borders, and forge alliances. The marriages of Henry Vivergi exemplify this dynamic. Each of his 6 marriages served a distinct political purpose, whether to secure a male heir, to form alliances with powerful families, or to reinforce his own claims to power. The role of the council in these royal divorces and executions was significant, acting as both the instrument of the king's will and the enforcer of the legal and societal norms of the time. The political motivations behind these marriages were stark, often overshadowing the personal lives of those involved. For the women married into royalty, the impact was profound. They were pawns in a larger game, their value determined by their ability to bear sons and their family's political standing. Divorce in medieval times was an arduous process, especially for women. Annulments were the only sanctioned means of ending a marriage, and even these were nearly impossible to obtain. The criteria for annulment were stringent, requiring proof that the marriage was never valid. This often meant proving non-consummation, a humiliating ordeal involving public examinations of women to confirm their virginity. The Church, as the arbiter of marriage, held immense power over these proceedings. The financial toll of seeking an annulment was significant, with costs that could bankrupt families. Women bore the brunt of this burden, trapped in marriages where they had no autonomy or legal rights. The public scrutiny and shame associated with annulment proceedings further deterred many from seeking this path, leaving them at the mercy of their husbands. The dowry system was a cornerstone of medieval marriage, a financial transaction that placed immense pressure on families and commodified women. A dowry was essentially a payment made by the bride's family to the groom's family, a practice that could lead to financial ruin or elevate a family's social standing. The negotiation process was complex, often involving protracted discussions and significant sums of money. For families unable to provide a sufficient dowry, the consequences were severe. Their daughters faced the prospect of remaining unmarried, a fate tantamount to social death, or marrying beneath their station, thereby dragging their entire family down with them. For the bride, the dowry represented both a loss of autonomy and a symbol of her family's investment in her future. Once married, everything she owned, including her dowry, legally belonged to her husband. This system was a reflection of the economic and social structures of the time, where women were seen as property to be traded and negotiated over. Inheritance laws in medieval society were designed to concentrate wealth in male hands, often leaving widows destitute. When a woman's husband died, his property typically went to his male relatives, not to her. This left many widows in precarious positions, forced to remarry quickly out of necessity rather than choice. For those unable or unwilling to remarry, convents offered a refuge, though not necessarily a desirable one. The societal expectations of widows were stringent, often forcing them into roles of servitude or dependence. Case studies of widows navigating these laws reveal the stark realities they faced, trapped in cycles of poverty and dependence. The role of convents and religious institutions as refuges for these women highlights the limited options available to them. Despite the oppressive systems in place, some women managed to thrive, employing strategies that allowed them to maintain or enhance their social and economic status. Margaret Beaufort is a notable example, a woman who navigated the treacherous waters of medieval society with skill and determination. Through careful management of her inheritances and strategic marriages, she became one of the richest women in England. Her story, and those of other successful medieval women, highlight the importance of strategic alliances and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. These women left a legacy of resilience and resourcefulness, demonstrating that even in the most restrictive of systems, it was possible to carve out a place of power and influence. For unmarried women in medieval society, the options were limited and the pressures immense. The social stigma attached to remaining single was significant, often leading to economic hardship and social ostracism. Unmarried women were seen as failures, unable to fulfill their societal roles as wives and mothers. The economic challenges they faced were considerable, with limited opportunities for employment or financial independence. For some, the option of becoming a nun offered a viable alternative, providing a degree of security and purpose. However, the role of nuns in convents was not without its own set of challenges and restrictions. The societal perception of unmarried women was harsh, reflecting the deeply ingrained gender norms and expectations of the time. The medieval legal system was often used as a tool to suppress and punish women who were politically or socially inconvenient. Accusations of witchcraft, adultery, or treason were fabricated with alarming ease, used to control and eliminate women who posed a threat to the status quo. The role of courts in reinforcing these gender norms was significant, with little regard for due process or justice. Notable cases of women accused unjustly highlight the broader impact on women's rights and the systemic nature of these abuses. The chilling reality is that many women were acutely aware of the risks they faced, yet had few options for escape or recourse. The legal and social repercussions for these women were severe, often resulting in imprisonment, execution, or social exile. In conclusion, the medieval marriage system was a complex web of laws, social expectations, and economic pressures that served to maintain the power dynamics of the time. Women were often the victims of these systems, their lives dictated by the whims of men and the dictates of the church. Yet, within this oppressive framework, there were those who managed to navigate the system, leaving a legacy of resilience and strength that resonates through history. As we transition to modern perspectives, These historical realities offer a sobering reminder of the progress still to be made in the pursuit of gender equality and personal autonomy. The echoes of the past continue to inform our present, challenging us to learn from history as we shape the future. In medieval Europe, the economic burden of dowries was a formidable challenge for families, often leading them into financial ruin. The dowry was a crucial part of the marriage transaction, serving as a form of payment that the bride's family provided to the groom's family. This payment was intended to ensure the bride's financial security and to compensate the groom's family for accepting her into their household. However, the size of the dowry was not merely a reflection of the bride's worth, it was also a statement of the family's social status and wealth. As such, families often went to great lengths to amass the necessary funds, sometimes plunging themselves into debt that could span generations. The socio-economic factors dictating the size of dowries were complex. In some cultures, dowries were seen as a means to secure advantageous marriages that could elevate a family's status. In others, they were a necessary evil, a way to ensure that a daughter would be well cared for in a society where her rights and opportunities were severely limited. The pressure to provide a substantial dowry could lead to financial decisions that jeopardized a family's stability and future. Comparatively, dowry practices varied widely across cultures. In some parts of Asia, dowries were seen as a bride's inheritance, a way to ensure her financial independence within her new family. In contrast, in many parts of Europe, dowries were viewed as a financial burden that families had to shoulder to ensure their daughters could marry. Over time, the evolution of dowry systems reflected broader changes in social and economic structures. In some regions, dowries became less about financial exchange and more about symbolic gifts, a trend that continues in some modern wedding practices. Despite this, the remnants of dowry systems persist in various forms around the world, often perpetuating gender inequality and financial strain. Marriage in medieval times was not the romantic union we often envision today. Instead, it was primarily an economic and social transaction. Families arranged marriages to consolidate power, wealth, and influence, treating women as commodities to be traded. The notion of marrying for love was a luxury that few could afford. The role of women within these marital exchanges was largely passive. They were the currency in a transaction that involved their fathers and prospective husbands. Marriage alliances were crafted with political strategy in mind, often involving intricate negotiations and agreements to ensure mutual benefit. Women's rights, or rather the lack thereof, in medieval society were starkly evident in these arrangements. Upon marriage, a woman lost her legal identity, becoming subsumed under her husband's authority. Her dowry became his property, and she had little recourse in the face of neglect or abuse. The evolution of marriage from a transactional to a more romantic union is a relatively recent development, spurred by changes in societal norms and the fight for women's rights. Today, marriage is increasingly seen as a partnership between equals, though the echoes of its transactional past are still felt in many cultures. The legal and social vulnerabilities faced by married women in medieval times were profound. Once married, a woman had few rights and even fewer protections. The law offered little recourse for those trapped in abusive relationships, and the societal expectation was for women to endure their plight in silence. The loss of rights upon marriage was a significant blow to women's autonomy. They had no legal standing to own property, enter contracts, or make significant decisions without their husband's consent. In many cases, women were left vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, with no avenue for escape. Case studies of legal reforms in marriage rights highlight the arduous journey toward gender equality. The influence of religion on marital laws often reinforced the subjugation of women, with religious doctrines dictating submission and obedience to their husbands. Parallels can be drawn with other historical periods, where women's rights were similarly curtailed, underscoring the persistent struggle for equality. High mortality rates in medieval times had a profound impact on marriage dynamics. Diseases, wars, and a lack of medical knowledge meant that life expectancy was low. This reality shaped marriage practices, with remarriage being a common and necessary occurrence. The role of epidemics, such as the Black Death, in shaping social structures cannot be overstated. Families were forced to adapt to the constant threat of death, often arranging contingency plans for remarriage. Comparisons of life expectancy across different regions reveal stark differences, with some areas experiencing higher mortality rates due to factors like conflict and poor sanitation. The psychological impact of frequent bereavement was significant. Medieval people often avoided forming deep emotional connections, recognizing the high likelihood of losing loved ones prematurely. Yet, despite the constant specter of death, the institution of marriage persisted, driven by necessity and societal expectations. The complexities of inheritance laws and family structures in medieval times were exacerbated by frequent remarriages. These practices created intricate family trees and shifting alliances, with blended families becoming the norm. Inheritance played a crucial role in consolidating power, with families vying for control over land and wealth. The legal challenges of blended families were manifold, with disputes often arising over rightful heirs and property distribution. Record keepers faced an administrative burden in tracking these ever-changing family structures, with church records documenting the intricate web of relationships. Marriage ceremonies in medieval times were rich in cultural and religious rituals. These celebrations were both joyous and somber, reflecting the pervasive acknowledgement of mortality. Symbolism played a significant role in marriage rituals, with elements like rings and vows carrying deep meaning. Comparisons with contemporary wedding practices reveal the enduring influence of these traditions, though modern ceremonies often emphasize personal choice and individuality. The Church played a central role in marital affairs, overseeing ceremonies and ensuring adherence to religious doctrines. The psychological impact of medieval marriage practices on individuals was profound. Living in an era fraught with financial, emotional, and mortal risks took a toll on people's mental health. Coping mechanisms varied, with some finding solace in religion, while others relied on community support systems. The evolution of marriage counseling and therapy reflects the ongoing effort to address the psychological challenges associated with marriage. The legacy of medieval marriage practices continues to influence modern perceptions and practices of marriage. Issues related to gender roles, economic partnerships, and the balance of power within relationships can be traced back to these historical roots. The evolution of marriage laws has been shaped by the fight for gender equality and the impact of feminism. Ongoing debates about traditional versus modern marriage values underscore the enduring complexity of this institution. In reflecting on the past, we gain a deeper understanding of the progress made and the challenges that remain. The history of marriage serves as a reminder of the resilience and adaptability of humanity in the face of adversity. As we navigate the complexities of modern relationships, the lessons of the past inform our pursuit of equality, partnership, and love.